We're on our way to Hot Springs Cove in Maquina Marine Provincial Park. It's north of Tofino in the northwestern edge of Clayoquot Sound. We're hoping to learn more about the changes that the Ahousaht First Nation are making within the park alongside BC Parks.
Ahousaht Adventures, pop up. I think I'm gonna go inside Vargas, inside Flores, up to the springs.
Copy that, thank you, have fun.
As you travel north into the heart of Clayoquot Sound, the busy surf shops and restaurant patios of Tofino quickly fade away. Out here, the truly wild West Coast reveals itself. It's the experience that thousands of people from across the globe seek every year when they visit the west coast of Vancouver Island. The sheer number of tourists is part of why the Ahousaht First Nation has taken more control over how many get to visit parks like this one.
This land is ours, and so Hot Springs Cove is a core part of Ahousaht First Nation traditional territory. It's nice to be here with so few guests and to really enjoy the springs. For me, it's been several years since I've been here because it can get too busy.
Tyson Atleo is a leader with the Ahousaht First Nation. He's been working closely with BC Parks to ensure the interests of the nation are being taken into consideration.
So the changes that we have collaborated with BC Parks to implement include restricting the number of commercially permitted operators. So the Ahousaht First Nation commercial operators have exclusive access from sunrise to 11 a.m. every day.
Commercial tour companies can now only bring one boat per day, with a maximum of 12 guests on board. The nation runs day-to-day operations in Hot Springs Cove, though the lands remain in the hands of the provincial government. Like many First Nations across the country, after colonization, the Ahousaht were largely shut out of decisions made about their land, even though they never signed it away in a treaty.
Well, long before visitors came to this region, the hot springs were, of course, a cultural site for my First Nation. And so our people have visited here for time immemorial, for as long as we know, enjoying the springs. And then, as time went on, it went relatively unmanaged for a period of time, and many agree that the springs became overcrowded.
You can see how busy it was earlier, and we were like almost waiting to get a spot, so now it's really nice.
And so you'd have days here where you'd have lineups to enjoy the springs, and that's just not really what this place represents.
You took a dip today in the springs.
Yeah.
How was that?
It was magical. It had been some time since I've done it. It was rejuvenating, it was inspiring. We hope that when people come to visit here, they understand that there are precious places like this around the world that really deserve our care and attention and deserve our protection and careful management.
Restricting the number of people at Hot Springs Cove isn't just to create a better recreational experience. This is a wild place, and the crowds were starting to take a toll. These restrictions are new as of this summer, put in place by Ahousaht and BC Parks, and they are still open to change.
How busy was Hot Springs Cove prior to those changes?
It's hard to imagine, but we were seeing upwards of 30 to 32,000 visitors annually. There were days where there were over 300 people arriving at the park, sometimes 75, 80 people waiting to get into the pools at once. And you might have seen the pools, they're quite small. Some people were bathing with soaps, and you have enough of that, and all of a sudden you're starting to see the loss of certain species. And I only have a team, there's myself and 2 other rangers out here, so we are spread thin. Having the Ahousaht Guardian team is really, I can't say enough about how happy I am that there are additional eyes and ears on the water and in the park. And that was one of the big priorities after COVID, was that BC Parks and Ahousaht started to develop a visitor use management strategy. So these are interim permit conditions that will be in effect until February of 2024, at which point we're hoping that the visitor use management strategy will have a little bit more rigor for us to put in place some more maybe permanent permit conditions for these operators. Government takes time sometimes to do things, and this is a huge industry. There's a lot of money involved in hot springs tourism. You have to make the right decisions for everybody.
Tourism is big business in Tofino. Those 30,000 visitors that came to the springs each year represented real money in the hands of local companies. And the commercial access changes at Hot Springs Cove now mean a lot less revenue for those businesses. I reached out to 5 different companies who offered tours to the springs. Most of them didn't want to comment, but one did agree to speak with me about how the changes are impacting them. It's a pretty big reduction, these temporary access limits. So what's different for you?
Our business would have done approximately a third of our business going up to hot springs. And today it's dramatically less than that, about half of what we used to be able to generate. So the opportunity for employees who are seasonal has been reduced a bit. And then our potential to generate income has been reduced a little bit as well. I'm really happy and excited and glad to see the House It Nation working in the management of the park, being unceded territories. We're dealing with reconciliation. We're dealing with just a new strategy and management. So I imagine they're starting in slowly and then seeing where they can go rather than just have a free-for-all, which was maybe more how it was business model beforehand.
These children are going to be our future drivers for our Who's Adventures.
In order to take visitors to the Springs this summer, the Ahousaht also launched their own tourism company. Woo! It's the first venture of its kind for the nation. They are now taking part in Tofino's booming tourism economy.
In terms of tourism in Tofino, where do you see Indigenous-led tourism? What kind of role do you see?
I think it's really important and really vital. The nations on the coast are a little bit slow to the show to start grasping on to these tourists and trying to share where they are. Like you're in a house at Hahufli right now, you know? So I see this going in a really, really good direction, considering a lot of awareness just all around the world. Like it's not just in Canada, it's not just on Vancouver Island, it's, we're still here even after the attempt of assimilation. So it's important to come into these industries and leave our stamp there.
The Ahousaht aren't the only First Nation at work protecting the lands and waters here in Clayoquot Sound. The Tofino First Nation consider all of the land within their traditional territory to fall within 4 tribal parks. That includes Wanajus Hilfuas, as it's known in New Channel, or Mears Island. It was declared a tribal park in 1984 as part of old-growth logging protests known as the War in the Woods. We're headed out with 2 tribal park guardians to find out more about what their work is all about.
The Tofino Tribal Park Guardians monitor the parks, doing everything from beach cleanups to river restoration to trail building. They are out on the lands and waters, an active and ongoing presence for the nation.
I've wanted to be a park ranger since I was 12. I've always wanted to protect the land. I've always felt close to nature. And when Guardians became a thing, that was more in line and further with my dream. And the role of a guardian is that of a park ranger and more. Part of asserting that you own sovereignty of the land, you have to go out on the land. It's the most important thing nations can do in that we have to show a presence on the territory.
Yeah, that's also why they built the boardwalk, to show we still own this land and still use it. So they built this boardwalk all the ways along.
How important is it to you as like a younger Indigenous person to move things forward in that way in terms of asserting sovereignty and showing that you're here?
It feels great. I feel like I'm really making a difference around here and helping out everybody, trying to help out the nation and everyone else that comes to visit.
Declaring a section of land as a tribal park doesn't mean that everything within its boundaries is suddenly protected. The Tofino have declared 4 tribal parks in their territory. They overlap with other boundaries, including 3 provincial parks, as well as Pacific Rim National Park Reserve. Some of the land is still open to logging and mining, but the tribal parks help the Tofino assert their presence and influence how this land is used now and in the future.
Can you tell us about how the Tofino Tribal Parks came to be?
It was born in 1984 from our declaration from our elders for the Mears Island Aboriginal title court case as a way of articulating what Aboriginal title lands are. Clayoquot prepared an Aboriginal title case to stop the logging on Mears Island, and in court it wasn't a question of how to log, when, or where to log. It was who has the right to issue a tree farm permit. And ever since then, we've been negotiating how we can merge or coexist our Aboriginal title with Canadian title. Ultimately, on the 30th anniversary of Mears Island Aboriginal title court case on the 2014, we declared our whole territory as a tribal park as a means of sharing and articulating our management of it. We've evolved our tribal parks to articulate our vision for sharing our homeland, our vision for what needs to transform from tree farms to protected areas to protect our culture. It also describes that guardians would monitor the implementation of our tribal park vision.
How different is that vision that Tolokwiat have for the land versus the Western vision for the land here?
Good question. So the footprint that's from the provincial government shows that there's tree farms everywhere, which leads to deforestation and broken rivers, impacted fisheries and drinking water. Our vision clearly maps out which rivers need to be restored and salmon recovery programs in place. Our goal isn't sustainability, our goal is abundance.
A new wave of Indigenous-led conservation is on the horizon. First Nations around BC are declaring parts of their territories as something called an IPCA, an Indigenous Protected and Conserved Area. These lands and waters are cared for by a First Nation under their own laws. Each IPCA is unique. Terry Dorward is from Tolokwiat. He helped establish their Tribal Park Guardian program. Now he works with other First Nations to create conservation areas of their own.
What is an Indigenous protected and conserved area?
It's a new way of looking at land resource relationships that have become unbalanced because of industrialization. We've had industry come into our territories and completely destroy areas, and who's left standing is the Indigenous people to clean it up. What Indigenous people are coming up with is how do we as Indigenous people not only ensure the well-being of our people, but also the land. As Indigenous people, we've been separated, we've been dislocated, we've been marginalized, we've been dislocated from our own territories. That time is over. The time for reclaiming and revitalizing our roles and responsibilities are now for not only our Indigenous nations, but for solving, this world crisis that we're all part of.
Whether you see it as decolonization or reconciliation, it's a slow process, and it takes hard work. These examples are from the Ahousaht and Tolokwiat First Nations on Vancouver Island, but similar efforts are happening all across the country. Here in BC, the government wants 30% of the land protected by 2030, and they are looking to Indigenous protected and conserved areas as part of that. As conversations about land rights and title continue, these parks have a role to play when it comes to reconciliation.